Good afternoon. I hope you guys are all enjoying this first full day of the summit, and thank you so much for coming to this session on cancer prevention and survivorship. You're going to learn all about the use of mHealth across the entire cancer continuum spectrum. My name is Heather Patrick. I'm a program director at the National Cancer Institute, and my co-moderator is Susan Darlow, who's at Fox Chase Cancer Center. The way we'll be doing the session today is that each of our speakers will have about 20 minutes to speak, and then we'll have opportunity for questions after each speaker. That way we don't overload the last presenter with all of our questions and you don't forget your pressing questions for each speaker. So without further ado, we'll have our first speaker, Karen Bassanenquist, talk about her work on tailored text messaging for exercise and cancer survivors.
Thank you, and thanks very much for the invitation to come present today. I want to recognize my co-author on this project, Melissa Carlson, a graduate student who put in a lot of good ideas and a lot of sweat equity on this project, so she should not go unrecognized. So I'm talking today about a very kind of early pilot test we have to look at the feasibility of an mHealth intervention for increasing exercise in cancer survivors. If I could have the first slide, please, or the next slide. Maybe.
It's great to have technical difficulties at the mHealth Summit.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that maybe this was the time that that dramatic music would play like it did for the, for the keynote speakers, the rock star music. So to provide you with a little bit of background, those of you who might not be familiar with the area, exercise is recommended for cancer survivors. There's been quite a bit of research now over the past 20 years showing that it's safe and also improves quality of life. Some evidence to indicate perhaps for breast and colorectal cancer survivors that it may reduce the risk of recurrence as well. The American Cancer Society and the American College of Sports Medicine both have published recommendations for cancer survivors that are roughly similar to those for the general population. 150 minutes of exercise per week, strength building exercises twice a week, and doing flexibility exercise twice a week. However, just like the rest of the population, most survivors are not meeting these physical activity recommendations. And unlike the rest of the population, they have some additional barriers and problems that may make it more difficult for them to adhere to the recommendations. Many survivors experience significant fatigue after cancer treatment. They may have ongoing pain issues or other late effects of cancer or cancer treatment that interfere with their ability to exercise. We did a study. Our lab is involved with studies of exercise in a range of cancer survivor populations, both looking at the benefits of exercise for survivors, but also looking at what can be done to encourage more exercise and how can we develop effective interventions. So we recently completed a study of exercise adoption in endometrial cancer survivors. Endometrial cancer survivors are kind of particularly at risk for low physical activity because low physical activity is a risk factor for developing endometrial cancer, as is obesity. So this is a kind of target population that's quite important to in which to encourage exercise. And so we were looking at social cognitive theory variables and how they predict exercise. If I could have the next slide. So because the pilot study I'm going to describe is sort of a spin-off of that study, which was called Steps to Health, I'm going to describe a little bit about that study and some of the findings that led us to do the pilot study. So this was Steps to Health was a one-arm study, a single-arm study in which we were studying the process of exercise adoption in this group of survivors. We saw the participants every 2 months. They came into our lab for assessment, and before and after that lab assessment, they also did some home-based assessment that I'll talk about in a minute. They also, after the first assessment, received an exercise prescription, a recommendation for how much they should do now and how to build up that exercise, and then received some weekly telephone counseling and other materials to help them adhere to the exercise recommendation. Next slide, please. So In the laboratory assessment, they did some fitness testing and questionnaires, but what I want to focus on here is the home-based assessment. So for 5 days before and after, they did some home-based assessment. We did ecological momentary assessment where people completed questions by using a handheld computer. At this time, we weren't actually using smartphones yet. And they, in the morning, they rated their self-efficacy and outcome expectations. If people aren't familiar with those concepts, the idea of self-efficacy is you're rating your confidence that you can participate in a behavior, and outcome expectations is what it sounds like, what the outcomes are that you expect from participating in that behavior. We also had some random assessments on how people felt during the day, and then when they exercised, we asked them to enter the minutes of exercise as well as the intensity, and in the evening, in case they didn't remember all of that, we asked them again to report the exercise they did during the day. They also, to provide an objective measure of physical activity, they wore accelerometers on all these days. Next slide. So I'm going to focus in on the results from that ecological momentary assessment analysis, the home-based assessment data. We were looking again at how the morning self-efficacy and outcome expectations predicted minutes of exercise that day. And what we found is that when we controlled for their usual level of exercise, their usual level of these social cognitive theory variables, next slide. Self-efficacy significantly predicted minutes of exercise done that day. Yeah, it's got some animation if you could just advance. Yeah. So that a 1 point increase in self-efficacy was associated with an increase of approximately 6 minutes of exercise during the day. And next slide. And for positive outcome expectations, a 1 point increase was associated with another 4 minutes of exercise. Next slide. And that's for positive outcome expectations, so sort of the expectation of benefits. The negative outcome expectations, so thinking that exercise might make you too tired or exercise was boring, were not related to the amount of exercise done that day. Next slide, please. When we put self-efficacy and outcome expectations in the same model, outcome expectations were no longer significant, but we still had quite a robust effect for a relationship between self-efficacy and exercise minutes. If you look at this graph here, these are the slopes for each individual for the relationship between self-efficacy and exercise minutes. And you can see that there's quite a substantial effect. All the slopes are above 0, first of all, so they're all in the positive direction, and they range from about 3 to about 11. We also did a number of kind of sensitivity analyses to try to see if this effect would go away. We tried using only accelerometer minutes as the measure of physical activity, and the results were still, self-efficacy was still a significant predictor. We tried dichotomizing the day into a day when they exercised versus a day when they didn't. That was significant. If we only included people who had at least some physical activity, it was still significant. And this was important because we thought perhaps this is just sort of a scheduling effect, that people know they're going to exercise so they're more confident. But even when we included only those who exercised, we still saw an effect. When we looked at self-efficacy from the day before, included that in the model as well. The results from self-efficacy that morning, that was still predicted the minutes of exercise that day. So it does appear to be an effect that's kind of confined to the self-efficacy that morning. Next slide, please. So what this led us to the next conclusion of, well, if you could, wouldn't it be good to try to do an intervention to increase somebody's self-efficacy every day, every morning, if they have low self-efficacy? Obviously, you can't call somebody every day and try to encourage their self-efficacy or have them come see a counselor. So could we do a smartphone intervention or some kind of mobile health intervention that could help us do this? But one concern that we had is that since largely cancer survivors are an older population, they may not be using technology, mobile technology, as much as younger populations. Would this be feasible, and what would people's receptivity be to it? So we decided to develop kind of a prototype of the eventual smartphone intervention that we'd like to develop and do a very brief feasibility test. We use for this a platform called SMART, which was developed for some smoking cessation studies that my colleague Dr. Damon Vidrine is running. We're going to try to demonstrate this authoring platform at the NCI kiosk tomorrow from 11:30 to 12. So if you're interested in, you want more information about that, we can hopefully show it to you. So we did this, we used this platform to develop a kind of abbreviated prototype of the full-scale intervention. Next slide, please. For this pilot test, we recruited 10 cancer survivors. They were breast endometrial colorectal cancer survivors. All were post-treatment. And they carried the smartphone with them for 5 days. We actually gave them a smartphone that this would run on, since the SMART platform was really early in its development and only worked on one on the Android platform. And we wanted to make sure it would work for them. And in the morning, they responded to questions about self-efficacy, and every evening they recorded information about their minutes of exercise and their steps. And every day they received 4 text messages on the smartphone that were tailored to their self-efficacy and physical activity levels from the day before. At the end of the 5 days, we did some interviews to assess their feedback on the intervention, and also took a look at their steps and minutes of activity and how they changed over the 5 days. Next slide, please. So this just provides you a little background information on the sample. It's, the average age was 58, which is fairly typical, maybe a little on the young side for cancer survivors. Most of them were female and white. We had 6 endometrial cancer survivors, 1 breast cancer survivor, and 3 colorectal. And largely this was a fairly low active population. The average number of days on which they had more than 30 minutes of activity in the past 7 was 2, about 2. So they were largely not meeting the recommendations. Next slide, please. This was perhaps a group that used technology a little bit more than we expected. So 6 of the 10 were daily texters, and 8 of the 10 actually owned smartphones. 7 owned iPads. So pretty good tech use there. Their self-reported proficiency using a smartphone was a 3 on a 5-point scale. Next slide. So just looking at the results, we did look at the steps and the minutes of activity over time, and we see that there was a significant linear trend for exercise minutes and a nearly significant trend for daily steps. So we did, even in the brief 5 days, we saw some increases in activity. That we had pretty good, pretty high program use. 80% of the participants completed nearly all the assessments. And 80% of them said they'd be willing to use it for 6 months or longer. Because one of the things we're really interested in is how long will people actually do this. Now, of course, just because people say they'll use it for 6 months after using it for 5 days doesn't mean they will. But at least, if they'd said, no, this thing drives me crazy after 5 days, we would know we are really on the wrong track. So we appear to be on the right track so far. So next slide, please. So we interviewed them about what kind of features they would like to see in a mobile health or a smartphone intervention. They definitely liked the scheduling and monitoring features. They wanted to have some variety in terms of questions and message content, which is understandable if you're thinking about using something long term. You don't really want to have the same messages over and over, or even the same questions. And we did vary the messages, but they had the same questions every day, and even after 5 days, that got a little monotonous, I guess. People were very interested in including also nutrition and weight loss in addition to exercise. And an interesting thing is they wanted really more interactivity. They wanted to be able to respond to the text messages they receive and get a response back. So they wanted it to be more interactive, or have features like being able to text an exercise physiologist with questions, things like that. They also want to be able to review their own data and look at the history of their data over time and have some more visual and text feedback, as well as goal-setting features. And of course, they wanted to have it on their own phone so they don't have to carry 2. Next slide, please. So So these are just some excerpts from their interviews, some quotes. You can see that, largely backs up what was just shown on the last slide. They were favorable about the program, thought it was fun, kind of a good challenge to beat their previous day's score. They liked the messages. They found, they were kind of waiting for the text messages to arrive, that they were good reminders about the benefits of exercise. And then some more information about the features, being able to respond to the text messages and get feedback, more feedback, as well as include more kind of weight management sorts of features and reviewing data. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, we feel like this kind of personalized technology can be helpful and motivational for cancer survivors. It appears to be feasible and acceptable, at least in this small sample. And so we are now moving forward with further development and testing of the smartphone application. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or I'll have Melissa answer them. Yes. I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. I have a question about the feasibility, acceptability of the smartphones with this older population. I'm doing a program now with young adults, so it's no problem. But did you get any sense from those who weren't using this sort of technology before your program, whether you think it's something that they can latch on to? And then in your further study, when you go into the full study, are you anticipating any problems with the older age group and also maybe with various ethnic groups?
Great question. So I'm going to answer the second part of your question, and then I'm going to ask Melissa to comment on the individual, since she interviewed everybody, and she can probably comment on that better than I could. So in terms of the next application, do we anticipate problems? I think one should always anticipate issues, but I think also as we as we can see in the data that the Pew Internet Survey is putting out and so forth, that there's increasing smartphone adoption in the older population, and it's going up as fast as the rest of the population, if not faster in some sectors. So I think that although it's a concern, I think it's not insurmountable. In terms of other ethnic groups, I think there are issues, we need to think about things like language and literacy levels as being important, but there also there are pretty high cell phone usage rates in minority and underserved populations as well. Not as much smartphone, but I think it's moving in that direction where people are really adopting kind of smartphones over computers, over desktop computers in more underserved populations. So I think it's something to pay attention to in our design, but not an insurmountable issue. So Melissa, about the ones who weren't as savvy with their smartphones. And actually, I was one of those people who hadn't used touchscreens, so Melissa had to keep reminding me like how it worked. But yes.
Just as a follow-up to the prior question, when you had I guess, a base of 10 folks, how many patients did you interview or had to go to get 10 patients?
Yeah, people were pretty interested in trying it out, so it's good. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Chrissy Cianflone from Duke Cancer Institute. and she's going to be speaking on a text messaging study, an interactive cancer prevention text message campaign.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to present to you some of the preliminary data from a pilot project that we recently completed that tested the use of text messaging for relaying important cancer prevention information. This project was a collaboration between the Avon Foundation for Women, GW University, the Cancer Institute, as well as the MFA, and my colleague, Dr. Neil Sicca, who was part of that team, is here now. I'd like to thank him, and Duke Cancer Center. Why did we decide to focus on cancer? Well, we know that it is a leading cause of death in this country, with an estimated, more than 1.5 million new diagnoses and over 500,000 deaths per year. And there are preventable risk factors that we all know about, such as tobacco use, obesity, physical inactivity, and poor nutrition. And we wanted a way to address these modifiable risk factors through text messaging, knowing that there's been promising evidence out there about the use and effectiveness of text messaging in health promotion efforts. The project was designed to test the feasibility of using mobile devices to educate and promote cancer prevention behaviors, and to test the impact that a program of this type could have on health promoting behavior change. So our study was called Text to Know. It was a 4-week interactive pilot with, we had wanted to target 150 members of the George Washington University community. We focused on 6 cancers and their prevention, screening, and modifiable risk factors. We were really looking at the impact of specific cancer prevention messaging on self-monitoring, knowledge, and behavior change. A convenient sample of GW staff, faculty, and students were recruited using listservs and campus flyers. We had eligibility criteria, which included you had to be over the age of 18, affiliated with GW University in some way as faculty, staff, or student, and have no previous history of cancer. We conducted the assessments, which included one baseline survey where we asked the participants information about personal history, health history, family history, and general knowledge about cancer. We did 4 short weekly surveys, which they received one of those every Friday through a text message, and we did a 1-month follow-up survey after the completion of the 4 weeks. The text portion of the program, for 4 weeks, they received 2 types of text messages. The first were called Did You Know? And the Did You Know texts were designed to increase cancer knowledge and literacy. And participants received those particular text messages Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. On Thursday, they received a text message that was really a Will You Act type of text. And that was designed to determine the likelihood that the participant would engage in certain types of behaviors. And again, Friday, the text message that they received was an embedded link to a weekly survey. So through our listserv efforts, we had 263 participants complete the eligibility screener. 222 actually met the criteria that we had set out that I spoke about earlier. And 168 completed the baseline survey and enrolled. So we were starting with the number really 168. We had 5 of those folks withdraw for some reason or another, and we don't know why. We think it might be provider compatibility with the system that we had. And from those 168 folks, 122 actually completed the 4 weeks as well as the follow-up. And on the right, you'll see the surveys that vary in completion numbers in terms of the different types of cancers, but we did have quite an overwhelming response to the completion of the weekly surveys that went out on Fridays. So what we found is the convenience sample was mostly women, about 77% of our participants. Almost 69% identified themselves as white. 86% were ages between 18 and 29. 80% of the folks were enrolled at GW, and 36 were employed. At baseline, we asked about their previous exposure to programs similar to this one, and more than 95% reported that they had not engaged in any other health-related text message program previously. Additionally, we asked whether they thought that the program of this type could impact their health, and as you can see, the majority were unsure at about 74%. After the program's completion, we assessed the participants' level of perceived risk of various cancer types. And for all 6 cancers except for skin, between 70 and 85% of the sample reported low self-assessed risk. For skin, however, the participants reported higher levels of that self-perceived risk. These responses were to be expected given the socio-demographic characteristics of our sample, which were young, healthy, and educated. The change in knowledge with regard to the awareness of cancer screening guidelines from baseline to follow-up was assessed using the Wilcoxon-signed rank test. Statistically significant differences were seen in skin, colon, breast, and testicular cancer knowledge, meaning their awareness of screening knowledge significantly increased from the baseline to the follow-up. We also asked about their likelihood to conduct self-exams if they were recommended. 27% of women reported an increase in self-examinations. We found differences by age and race, whereas the males, aged 18 to 24, were less likely to conduct self-exams, and males aged 25 to 29 were more likely to conduct self-exams. Females, white females in our sample were much less likely to conduct self-exams. A follow-up survey was sent to the participants after they completed the 4 weeks of the text messaging, and the overwhelming majority of males and females believed that the text messages were a good way to receive health information. The great part about it, too, was that over half of them felt that this type of program increased their personal concern regarding their own overall cancer risk. And the overwhelming majority stated that they would participate in similar text messaging health promotion programs in the future. Again, this pilot project was 4 weeks, so for our process evaluation, we found that participants reported that the text message length was just right, and the 1 to 2 texts per day that they received was just right. And how it worked is once they enrolled, they would get the text on Monday, the did you know text, and we would ask them a did you know fact about the particular type of cancer for that week. And they would be prompted to respond with a 1, yes, they knew that, or 2, no, they did not know. And once they hit that 1 to 2 and we got the message back, then they would receive another message saying thank you for your response. You'll receive another text tomorrow. So that's where the 1 to 2 text messages per day comes in. The limitations of this project include our convenient, homogeneous, healthy sample. The next phase of the project will target less healthy populations with a greater cancer risk and cancer-related health disparities. Additionally, this project relied heavily on self-reported data and did not test their specific knowledge of screening and risk information. Lastly, it's unclear how the incentive impacted participation and how this would differ in a real-world setting. So for all of the participants that completed the surveys, the 4 weeks, and then the follow-up 1 month later, they received a $20 gift card. So at the end of the study, we gave out 112 $20 gift cards to all of those participants. What were our lessons learned? The recruitment through the listserv proved to be most effective. We were actually quite surprised when we had well over 260 people that had initially expressed an interest in the program, and we were very happy when the 160 some had enrolled that we had 112 that had actually followed through the whole project, and it was a really easy and low cost effort in terms of recruiting these participants. With 112 of those folks that had completed, of the 222 that had originally started and were eligible for the program, there was definitely great interest in the topic and the text message type of program. With the high follow-up numbers, we had a lot of comments that we received. through the surveys, and most of the participants said the messages were great. The frequency was right on. The length of the message was perfect, and the content was poignant. And they did not know about a lot of the stuff that we had actually put in the particular messages. So the acceptability. At baseline, 96% of people had never used an SMS texting program before, and 74% were not sure if this type of program would impact their health. At follow-up, greater than 85% of participants stated that they would participate in a similar program in the future. This demonstrates the potential for a novel and cost-effective medium for mass communication for cancer prevention. The behavior change piece. Cancer prevention behaviors such as screening and self-exams showed demonstrable increase from baseline to follow-up. However, no participants were screened in the 30 days the 30 days of the program itself, which is probably just a result of simply the group that we ended up recruiting. They're a much younger population and much healthier. In future studies, we need a more ideal population to be followed over a much greater period of time to determine whether long-term cancer prevention behaviors are actually increased, whether we see an increase in mammography screenings, whether we see an increase in colorectal cancer screenings, and so on. What we would like to do next, we want to test this program in a larger racially and socioeconomically diverse population. We want to test Spanish models. We received great interest from community partners both in DC and in Durham who want to expand a program like this in Spanish. And we want to conduct a larger randomized trial of this modified program. So that's it. I'd like to thank you for your time. If you have any questions.
People that are motivated or get people to be motivated to change. I'm very interested to hear about what you think. Seems like a lot of women were involved, and for your study, was that surprising, or did you kind of think the participation rates would be that way? And do you attribute that to anything?
It's initially this program morphed from another program that we had, which was a self-breast exam reminder program. And so we were targeting that in Washington, D.C., actually, in Southeast, not far from here. And this program morphed out of that, and we had a lot of interest. We did focus group testing, and so we sort of had this presumed assumption that we would get more women, especially since the male cancers in particular, testicular cancer is not very common. And so for a young male population, probably,
generating interest or...
Exactly. And for, colorectal cancer, it's clearly a cancer of, an older population. We decided not to do prostate cancer simply because of the controversy around the screening right now, and we just decided to leave that aside, and that's why we focused on testicular and prostate. Clearly the participants didn't know that upon enrollment, but, that's what we found.
Thank you. And then Karen, for your study, I missed the beginning, so did you exclusively go after women, or is that just kind of how it happened?
Not exclusively, but we actually recruited from people who had participated in studies we've done before, and one was with endometrial, one was with breast, and one was with colorectal, so two of the three cancers.
So that might, yeah.
We found in other studies where we've been recruiting cancer survivors, for example, we have some studies where we recruited breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer survivors for health behavior change interventions, and we do find that women are more likely to participate. They don't have the same percentages.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious if people thought that was because you're kind of starting to create a social environment for it. Maybe that's why. I'll also suggest that when you do further studies, please remember ovarian cancer too. Excellent. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. And our final speaker this afternoon is Bernard Femmeler.
Okay. What I'm going to be talking about today is the development process that we went through to design a mobile phone app for promoting diet and physical activity in pediatric cancer survivors. So it's really the process that we went through to get the product or the intervention that we've come up with. We're moving forward with some pilot testing, but I'll talk a little bit about that next. So next. Just to give you a little bit of a background, there are about 12,000 children diagnosed with cancer each year. The incidence rates are increasing, but only slightly, and it's estimated that there are slightly over 300,000 adult survivors of pediatric cancer in the U.S. right now. And with improvements in technology, improvements in medical delivery and technology, these young people are living longer lives than ever before, and that is a good thing, but it also comes with a host of complications in survivorship. One area that's been particularly concerning in this cohort, in this group of survivors, is the risk of obesity. And there have been a number of studies now, this one being one of the first, where they looked at prevalence of obesity in the survivor group, comparing it to their sibling counterparts, and they find that elevated prevalence in the survivor group compared to their group comparison. And it's more, the risk is higher in females, and if there was an earlier diagnosis, and if radiation therapy was used. And it's really because of these, types of observational studies that groups like COG have recommended that childhood cancer survivors should really maintain a healthy weight. And this includes healthy nutrition and adequate physical activity, really to promote healing, also to reduce the risk that obesity might have on some of the complications that are associated with long-term cancer treatment. It's really surprising that there are very few interventions that have been directed towards this group. There are very few available currently. The existing interventions often require the patient and his or her parent to come into the hospital to receive some sort of education programming or health promotion messaging. And not surprisingly, these kids, usually are recruited after they've been cured. They don't really want to come back to the hospital anymore. The attrition rates are very high in the pilot studies that have been described. They're really not designed to reach a geographically dispersed population, and this is a real big problem because kids are coming from all over the state to a children's hospital, so they're very dispersed, unlike adult cancers. Also, many of the programs that have been developed are really not developmentally tailored. They're not designed with the child in mind. So I think this is where technology might be useful and where we might be able to leverage some of the power of mobile health and mobile technology to improve these kinds of intervention programs. One of the ways in which technology can be very helpful is by improving the self-monitoring process. Monitoring can help patients develop insights into patterns of their daily life, stress, other daily patterns that might put them on the trajectory for poor health. Monitoring also provides patients with the ability to receive some feedback on how they're doing as they're engaging in the behavior change process. So this is very important, and it can be encouraging as you're moving towards behavior change. Also, in order for monitoring really to be useful, though, there has to be some engagement with the monitoring device. Paper and pencil monitoring doesn't really work well because it's not engaging. But with technology, we can do some more innovative things in terms of making it more engaging. And so how can we make this monitoring process a little bit more sticky, I think, is the challenge for these kinds of intervention programs. And this is where I think gamification can be helpful. And gamification has been defined as the use of game elements and game design techniques to enhance the engagement in non-game contexts. And game elements are things like points, badges, leaderboards, right? You've seen this, and sometimes avatars to represent oneself in the game. So another important game element is the social network. Social games allow people to connect with one another, compete, cooperate, help one another. They also allow people to signal their success in the game, the social network does. Game design is really about using those game elements in a creative way of bringing people into the game process, having them sort of develop the skills that they need, and moving them through towards more of a mastery level of achievement. So it's with those game design techniques that inspired us to develop this mobile phone app called Mila Celestial Blooms. The intervention in the app that we have developed really was inspired by social cognitive theory. We felt that by increasing self-regulation skills like self-monitoring and perceived social support and behavioral capabilities, we might be able to influence down the line physical activity behaviors and diet behaviors. We kind of envisioned a system that looked sort of like this. When we started, we thought, well, we'd have an app where users can enter their dietary information. There would be a way to sync information with a pedometer. That there would be also a staff work site where we can collect the data for research purposes and evaluation. That there would also be a coach website where we could intervene as needed. And then there would be websites for the parents and the kids to be able to access their information if they didn't want to see it on the phone. So that was our sort of overall vision of how we were wanting to develop that. We wanted to also incorporate game mechanics, and when we started developing it, we felt like that we wanted it to be fun. We didn't want it to just be a series of points and badges. We wanted there to be some engagement with it, and we wanted to design a brand around it, because we felt like designing this brand would help establish credibility. It would help us give a more clear message. You know, this is a very finicky group. You know, they're used to a lot of different technologies. So we wanted this brand to also establish a loyalty, something that they would feel kind of proud to be using or engaging with. One of the things that as we went through this process of branding and talking about what we wanted the feel of the app to be like, we talked a little bit about the idea of doing these expeditions and doing mountain climbing. This kind of came into our thinking. And so we liked this idea. We wanted to tap into something about going through something difficult, summiting a peak, or going through something difficult with the help of technology, with the help of social support, patients, providers giving social support. We wanted that kind of to be the feel of the app. And we felt like this mountain climbing theme, because you don't mountain climb alone, you do it with your peers and sometimes a guide. So we wanted to bring that into the app. And we didn't want to hit them over the head with the idea that you're a survivor also. We wanted that to be sort of in the subtext. We also thought about a visual theme to bring the context together. And one of the visual themes that we thought about was this idea of steampunk. And if you don't know, steampunk is sort of like it's like bringing past technology into the future. It's like future retro kinds of technology, and it's advancing technology from the past in some futuristic world. We liked this. We thought this would appeal to teenagers, because, especially teenagers that might be a little bit different, but it's a kind of an engaging visual theme. So the game that we developed is called Mila Blooms, and Mila Blooms is about going on a series of expeditions. You have to go on a series of expeditions to summit these mountains all over the earth and collect Mila flowers. And Mila flowers have healing properties. The way it works is that participants get to choose an avatar, and that represents their position in the game. They log their diet and sync their pedometer, and that's the way they earn points. And they collectively earn enough points they can go on to the next expedition. When we started with the concept, we presented this concept to teenagers, to cancer survivors, a group of 10, and we asked them what they thought about the concept of the expeditions and the Mila game and the going to get these flowers. And we also had paper mock-ups of our app at this point. We didn't really know what the design was going to be, so we showed them this, what we thought the app would look like. We got really good feedback from our initial set of interviews with patients. They liked the idea. They liked the idea of the mountain climbing. They thought this was cool. Some of them wanted to play it right away, like, when can we play this? It sounds great. They liked the points and the badges. They would like to play it, but they didn't really want to play it longer than 8 weeks. They thought they could play it for 8 weeks, but they just didn't want to play it longer than 8 weeks. And they'd be okay with their parents being involved in the game, but they don't want their parents playing them with them. These are teenagers, mind you, so they like it if they can help them, but don't sabotage them. That's what they kind of didn't want. You know, a couple of participants wanted something to shoot, but you know, we didn't take everything that we learned from that in those interviews into our game design. So the way the expeditions are set up are to describe the sort of story that they're going through in the game, but we also try to sort of incorporate traditional health education messaging within the storyline. So, for example, in Expedition 1, if they are learning about the Mila petal and the Mila flower and the healing properties, in order to learn about it, they have to be good scientists and be good at measurement. And so we have real-world challenges where we ask them to measure out serving size of their favorite snack, for example, and send a picture of that to us with an indication of how many calories it has. So we tried to give them challenges that would match similarly to the way the game was developing. There's a comic book strip that accompanies the app, so they get a little bit of a story that sort of gives a little bit more immersion into the storyline, tells them a little bit more about what the goals are for that week, what they're focusing on. There's a parent newsletter that we've developed that accompanies the app, and it kind of gives the parent a little bit of advice on what they can do to improve their child's ability to earn points in the game. So I'm just going to take you through a series of screenshots here. If you want to see the app, I'll be at the NCI Pavilion, NIH Pavilion with a demo, and we can look at it together then. I'll be there at 5:30. So the overall home screen provides the player with information on where they are as a group in completing that expedition. It also gives them an indication of their badges, how many badges they have. There are challenges that they can see. These come either individual challenges or group-based challenges. More detail, if they want to drill down, they can get more detailed information about their status, their badges. There's a place there for equipment, so there's a bookcase there for equipment, virtual equipment. So when they complete challenges, they can earn locks, and locks are the ways in which they unlock access to purchasing these different pieces of equipment that are sort of related to the storyline in the game. The fuel screen is where you can enter foods that are eaten during the day. So if the player taps on the plus signal on meals, they get to choose what type of food they ate. For example, if they ate green foods, they're foods like fruits and vegetables, and they can enter the number of servings. We're doing a little bit of education around what is a serving size. They get a little bit of feedback on the logging the food, and then their needle kind of moves a little bit in a direction of higher energy. The pedometer is an ANT plus based pedometer, so that's sort of like low frequency Bluetooth. So what they do when they can carry around the pedometer, they don't have to have the phone with them all the time, but when they're near their phone, they can update step counts by clicking on update step count and sync their pedometer. It searches for the pedometer, it downloads the data from the pedometer, and then they get points based on the number of steps they've taken for that day. So as you see the yellow arrows down there, tells them how many steps they've taken. Those are in 1,000 increments. And so we can set a goal for them. We can work with them to set a goal of like 5,000 steps. If that, we don't want them to go to 14,000 right away, which is the recommended amount for adolescents, but we could work with them to set a reasonable goal and then have them work towards that goal. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. There's a social network piece that's built into the app as well. What this is called the camp screen, and so participants can give short message texts. They can post a text to the board and share it with everyone. They can also post a message just to the Sherpa, so they can take a picture of something that they may have a question about. Is this a red food or is this a yellow food? And they can send that information to the Sherpa and get some feedback that way. And then that text message appears in their social network piece. There's a back-facing website that a coach can view, and the coach is able to see information on the different aspects of the app. So activities, the step counts that people are engaged in, the types of food that people are logging. So this is all coming in real time, and we can see this in real time and access it in real time. And so when we do some coaching contacts with them, we are able to see their data and see where they're at over the week. We can also send them individual challenges. So if a participant wants to work on a specific goal like reducing television time, we can say, okay, well, let's make that your challenge this week, and we'll send you a little text message, and that'll appear in the challenge log. And so we can enter in their challenge and send it to just one participant, or it can be sent, or a group-based challenge can be sent as well. So what we did is we've done a little bit of play testing with this with five teenagers. These were not cancer survivors. We didn't want to overutilize our sample pool. So the teens used the app for about 2 weeks. We paid them for using the app. We asked them to try to figure out where the bugs are. And we did some brief focus groups. What we were able to do with that play testing period was to start to begin to learn how we're going to extract the data. So we can extract data based on the servings of food quality on a daily basis, and so we can pull that information out and aggregate it across the 5 participants, for example. Here are step counts for each subject on a daily basis for the 12 days, and so we can get some information there. We can aggregate the step counts for the whole group of participants. So what we learned from doing this play testing was well, first we detected a bunch of software bugs, and so participants sent in the chat message, this thing is not working, or my pedometer is not syncing right, and so we were able to start to address those. We also had them talk a little bit about what they liked and didn't like about the ideas, the game design, and the gameplay, essentially. And some of the feedback that we got was that they wanted a better indication of what their personal best was. So they wanted to know how they were doing in an expedition, not necessarily relative to other people, but they wanted to know, is it better than what they've done before? And so we've redesigned the badges so that they can earn bronze, silver, or gold badges. It's sort of like if you're playing Angry Birds and you get 1, 2, or 3 stars based on how you did on that set of Killing the Pigs expedition. And then they also wanted some more orientation to the game. The game, we would have liked to have used like video montages and showed them this nice little picture of like the backstory, but technically that's kind of complicated. So we're going to do a little bit better job of trying to integrate them onboard them into the game a little bit better as we move into the feasibility trial. We also we're very overburdened as health coaches trying to give out these challenges to all the participants. So we've tried to make this a little bit more automated so that we come up with a series of challenges and they can be sent out at a certain point in time. So I think that'll make things move a little bit smoother. We're moving into a feasibility phase now, and this will be an 8-week intervention, and we're looking at questions around feasibility, how long will they play, will they use it every day? And then eventually what we'd like to do is move into a randomized trial. To do this, it's complicated. You have to think through a lot of different design issues. For example, what is the control group going to be, and how would we do this in a multi-center trial? Because you don't have enough patients at any one institution to do this kind of work. So, and then maybe, do we want booster sessions? Do we want them to play it for 8 weeks and then have like another expedition like 3 weeks later that kind of appears as something that they can do further? So we're trying to think through and plan out those processes that we think will help us for designing the trial. So with that, I'd just like to thank my collaborators. We have really a multidisciplinary team working with us, epidemiologist, a computer scientist, we have a biostatistician, we have our HEMOC docs working with us on this, and we also, my staff of course, and they do excellent work at getting everybody in. And then we have been working with some software engineers, a company called Little Green Software, and it's been very beneficial to have somebody local to work with, and that's been really great. And Ed Holsworth, who's in the audience here, helped with a lot of the design and the technical aspects that we needed to undertake this. And this is funded through a R21 mechanism through the NCI. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Kenny Crowley at University of Maryland. This is a terrific program. It's really capturing out nice elements, a nice interface. I'm just a little curious about, so what were the actual resources it took to build this in terms of timeline, and do you have some people in terms of some of the resource and allocations and get this stood up?
It can take a little bit of resources. The R21 mechanism through the NCI is basically a mechanism for designing behavioral interventions. And so we went in under that mechanism, and I think it's something like $250,000 a year for over 2 years. Is that correct? So, and then of course you get cut by 8% because everybody gets cut. Depending on the year. So you kind of pull in resources from other places, and we're a little behind schedule. We would have liked to have started the feasibility study, but it took us we started from a very rough sketch. That the grantee, it was reviewed well, but it was just still a very rough sketch from where we wanted to end up, and that is being something that kids will actually enjoy using. So it took us a little bit over a year to come up with a design and actually get all the systems working. And so we're still tinkering with them, but we'll have them done before we move into the feasibility study. But you can do it within the context of that kind of funding mechanism. It's a little tight, but it's possible.
Excellent, thanks.
Good afternoon, Mike Sanchez from the National Institutes of Health and NCI. My question is regarding the adoption of interventions such as the one you proposed. We know that the R21 takes a couple of years just to have some results. You're planning on moving towards a randomized controlled trial, and at the same time there's about a couple hundred of physical activity nutrition interventions that are readily available, and they're changing every day.
Yeah.
So what contributions do you think your app or your studies will have to the arena of e-health applications or mobile health technology like this?
Yeah. I mean, we're not stopping, or we're pursuing other avenues to try to develop this further into maybe a product or into something that could be more useful and translated a little bit more quickly. But you know, there's a lot of credibility behind something that has been tested and evaluated, especially if you're going to be giving it to patients like pediatric cancer survivors. This is a group that, you know, you don't want to give something that hasn't been well tested or well evaluated. And so we have, we think that this system that we're developing and the way in which we're developing it by testing it with real patients and evaluating it and having them being co-developers along the way adds value that other types of off-the-market kind of products might not have. And it's not to say that this couldn't also contribute, but we think that, you know, this is co-designed with our patient population, and that adds, I think, some value where, you know, a cancer doc might be more willing to say, no, this is, we know about this, it's been evaluated in our patient populations.
Hi, Keith McInnes, Department of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you.
I am not very familiar with gaming at all. I really enjoyed the presentation. I work with more middle-aged people and wondered if, and I know this may not be your area, but do you have any thoughts of how these kinds of gaming concepts might work in older populations?
Do you use LinkedIn, Keith?
I do.
Okay. So LinkedIn is the way in which they encourage you to complete your profile is they give you a status about how much you've completed that profile. So you're 80% complete. And if you do these other things, you'll be 5% more complete. So this is a simple game.
I'm like 60% complete on
Awesome.
LinkedIn. That's the problem.
The game design mechanics are not working on you. You're too busy. That's the problem. But, you know, these types of game design mechanics, I think, are, I hear people say this to me all the time, well, this is great for kids, but it's not going to work for older adults, and it's not going to work for middle-aged adults. Well, I don't necessarily believe it. I think anybody for sure born after 1971 who've played video games growing up will appreciate this. Those that are born before, you know, they're playing Words with Friends, they're playing other kinds of games. So I think we can learn something from game design and game mechanics in helping to increase the engagement process. It doesn't have to be over the top and hitting yourself on the head. It does with kids. It has to be a little bit more engaging, but we can learn some of the basic tools from that industry and apply it here, I think.
I think I've heard that the fastest growing gaming market is actually middle-aged women.
Yeah. Social media.
Social media games and Farmville. Mm-hmm. I have friends on Farmville who are actual farmers.
Thank you so much to our speakers and to all of you for being such great participants in this session. Please feel free to come up and talk to our speakers afterward and have a great rest of your afternoon and enjoy the summit.